Hello everyone, welcome to my new channel, the ABCD of Cbse English. My name is Tazir. For today's discussion, I have selected Class 11 Cbse English book, Hornbill, and we're going to discuss a very interesting poem from this book. The name of the poem is A Photograph. Let's start. Well, let's get to the point like how you can get benefit from this discussion. I have prepared visual illustrations of the poem, which is going to help you understand how the poet is taking us back to the time when the memory was actually being created. And then she's taking us back to the present by taking pause in between. So let's get to the poem straight away. The poem has 19 lines in total. For our convenience, we're going to break up the lines into small sections. We're going to take pause and understand the poem line by line. So what is the poem about? The poem is about remembrances. The poet looks at a photograph and it evokes some memories and events from the past. And when was the poem written? Well, we're not sure about it. We just know that this is one of the best poems of Shirley Toulson, who is the poet of the poem. Let's talk a little bit about the poet. The poet is Shirley Toulson. Toulson was an English poetess. She worked as a teacher of creative writing for adults. Well, at this point, you may pause the video, get to your textbook, bring the poem here because we're going to start discussing the poem. And like I said before, since we're going to get into a time machine, travel through the memory lanes of the poet, while you go and bring your textbook, for me, I'm gonna get a coffee. Sounds good? All right. Well, the poem has 19 lines in total. For our convenience, I'm gonna break the poem into smaller sections and we'll be discussing the poem in detail. Let me start with the first 4 lines of the poem. The cardboard shows me how it was when the 2 girl cousins went paddling, each one holding one of my mother's hands, and she, the big girl, some 12 years or so. Now the photograph has 3 girls in it. The girl in the middle is the tallest, and she is the mother of the poet. There are 2 other girls by the side of the mother who are the cousins of the mother. They're holding each other's hand and standing there on a seashore. Now we are back to the time when the photo was actually taken. The frame goes off and we find ourselves on the seashore where the girls were walking holding each other's hand. Let's look at line 5 to 9. All 3 stood still to smile through their hair at the uncle with the camera. So the girls were standing still in the photo and they were posing for the camera. And who was the camera person? The uncle. A sweet face, my mother's, that was before I was born. So 2 things are happening here. Number 1, the poet is talking about her mother. She's zooming in on the face of the mother and she's saying her mother has a sweet face. And at the same time, she was giving us an idea about the time frame when the photo was taken. It was taken before she was born. So pretty old photograph. Let's look at line 8 and 9. These lines are very remarkable because they set a contrast between what is temporary and what is permanent. And the sea, which appears to have changed less, washed their terribly transient feet. So there is this sea which seems to have changed very little, and then there is this transient feet which implies the fast moving time. So we have the sea at the backdrop, which seems to have changed very less, And there was this transient feat, which also signifies the human body, the moments that were being enjoyed there, the moment when the photograph was clicked. Those moments are gone, but the sea is still there with very little change in it. So let's take a small pause here and get us introduced to the characters discussed in the poem. We know the mother. She is standing in the middle. She's the tallest one. And then we know the camera person, who is the uncle. We also know that there are two other girls standing on either side of the mother, and they were the cousins of the mother. Now we have a name for them, Betty and Dolly. Now I love the poem a lot because in the next lines, the poet puts us in a time machine and fast forwards the time to 20 or 30 years later. What's happening? Now the mother is holding that photo. Remember, the photo was taken at a time when the poet was not born. Now the poet is there watching the mother, and the mother is holding that photo in her hand. Now let's look at line 10 to 15. Some 20-30 years later, she would laugh at the snapshot, the mother. "See, Betty and Dolly," she would say, "and look how they dressed us for the beach." Right? Now the poet is saying the sea holiday was her past. Whatever happened in the sea holiday, the enjoyment, the moment, their walk on the sea beach was my mother's past. Mine is her laughter. So the poet was present there in a corner and she could see her mother laughing, and now she remembers it. So there are two memories. The mother remembers the time when the photo was taken, the way Betty and Dolly were dressed up. The poet remembers her mother laughing, looking at the photo. Both wry with the labored ease of loss. What the poet means here is that in both cases, when the mother was looking at the photo and remembering the past moment, and when the poet is looking at the photo and remembering her mother laughing, both of them feel a sense of loss because the time is gone now. And both of them had tried hard to come in terms with the truth. So just a recap of what has happened so far in the poem. So the poet looks at the photo, takes us back to the time when the photo was taken, and then brings us back somewhere in the middle, some 20 or 30 years later, when the mother was looking at the photo. And in the last 4 lines of the poem, we are at a moment when the poet is looking at the photo. So we are back to the present again. Now let's look at the last 4 lines of the poem. Now she has been dead as many years as that girl lived. What the poet means to say is her mother was 12 years old when the photo was taken, and now it has been 12 years since her mother died. Let's look at the last couple of lines. And of this circumstance, there is nothing to say at all. It's silence, silences. The poet has no words to explain how the death of the mother has affected her. The circumstance refers here to the death of the mother, which silenced the mother, and the after effects, which has silenced the poet too. She is so absorbed in the grief that she is not able to vocalize it anymore. Now let us look at the tone of the poem. You must have noticed the poem starts with a joyful tone. It runs through the body of the poem. So the poet looks at the photograph. It evokes the past memories when the photo was taken and the girls were roaming on the beach. And then later, at a time after 20 to 30 years, when the mother was looking at the photograph and she was laughing at the way Betty and Dolly dressed. And then towards the end of the poem, we find a realization of the poet that there is this big grief of those past moments which cannot be recovered, and the poet is trying to come in terms with the grief. Now, before we conclude the poem, let us discuss some important tough elements for you, literary devices that are being used in the poem. So the first one is alliteration. Well, alliteration is the repetition of the initial letter of several words. Generally, it is of the consonants. We get an example of alliteration in the poem. All three stood still to smile. That's an example of alliteration. Stood still to smile. Next is personification. It's a literary device that is used to attribute some human qualities to something which is not human. In the poem, we get an example where the poet says, "Its silence silences." Now, the poet gives silence the ability or the authority to stop her from speaking.